So,
Welcome to Heraldry class by Squire Antoinette, Master Seneschal.
okay. Now we are going to share my screen. I have Sven. I can't share screen. How do I?
I fix. Hang on.
Aha. No.
Does that work?
No, you just highlighted me. I still can't share screen. Host disabled participant share screening.
Try that.
There we go. All right. We're going to go with that screen. We're going to make it larger. Okay, so we're going to talk about heraldry today. Woo, another project of mine. So, what is heraldry? Heraldry is the science and art of designing, displaying, describing, and recording coats of arms, also referred to as armorial bearings or simply as arms. Its origins lie in the need to distinguish participants in battle, or jousts, or other such historical type things, and to be able to describe the various devices they carried or painted on their shields. Strictly defined, heraldry denotes that which pertains to the office and duty of a herald. The part of his work dealing with the bearings of arms is properly termed armory, but in general usage, heraldry has come to mean the same thing. In Belegarth, heraldry is often worn on a belt sash, garb, armor, standard banner, or painted, or in our case now, plasti dipped onto a fighter's shield. 3 important terms that don't really fit in any other place of important terms is the field, which is the background on which a coat of arms is set. The charge, which is anything that lies on the field of a coat of arms. And then proper, which indicates that the colors present would naturally be found on the object in question. Most charges in Bell are not proper. I think in this entire presentation, I found one. Direction terms. So, you're going to hear words like dexter, sinister, chief, and base, which are the directions of where something sits on a coat of arms. So dexter is the right of field or the reader's left. Sinister is the left of field or the reader's right. Chief is the top and base is the bottom. There are words that denote specific colors on heraldry, and most of them are in French because that's where all of this started. So you have argent, which is white or silver, erzir, which is blue, gulls, which is red, or which is gold or yellow, the French word for purple that I can't pronounce, which is purple, sable, which is black. You have a specific term for blood red, which is sanguine. You have tawny, which is orange, and vert, which is green. There are also furs or patterns that can form the field background, which is ermine, as displayed here, which is a field with black dots that are supposed to represent an ermine tail, and the reverse, which is a black field with white dots. You have ver, which is a tessellation of shield-shaped checkered blue and white. In other colors, you describe it as a field verily, so that could mean it's in a different color. So when you're looking at Sir Kyrian's shield, that top left corner of his is verily in red and yellow. And then you have checky or checkered bearing or chequi, which is the term that refers to checks, which is most heraldry in them. So, we have Sir Kyrian's shield, which is here, which we will describe in a second. But there are four typical ways you divide a field, which is halved vertically, party per pale. You have halved horizontally, party per fess. Halved diagonally from the upper left, dexter chief, to the lower right, sinister base, which is party per bend. There's no word for when you flip the halved diagonally. So if it's going from sinister chief to dexter base, there's no actual word for that. And then you have party per cross or quarterly, which is what Sir Kyrian's is here. So here's the shield section we described earlier. And then he has his eagle. I think it's an eagle on black. And then I failed to figure out how to properly describe this lower quarter. I couldn't figure it out. The closest you get is like pretending it's a St. Andrew's cross, but that's not even right. So I wasn't able to get a hold of him to figure out how that's described. But again, lots of our heraldry is indescribable.
That's Girony.
Oh, okay. Cool. We'll have to write that term down. So, the most basic charges are called ordinaries. There are 9 honorable ordinaries, as described here. You have fess, which is a horizontal stripe across the shield. Pale, which is a vertical stripe down the center or down the shield. It doesn't necessarily need to be center. Bend, a diagonal stripe. Chevron. Cross, Satyr, which is the St. Andrew's cross. Chief, which is a bar across the top edge, which is also a direction. I know that's confusing. Border, which is the border, or pile, which is a downward pointing triangle. I was quite happy to find this image on the English Heritage Understanding Heraldry page. So, there are some non-animal common charges. So that's something that isn't an animal that's on your shield. The common ones are an amulet, a ring, or a chainmail link, usually more than one, a 5-pointed flower, a crescent, usually sewn with the ends pointing up, a stole, which is a 6-pointed star with wavy rays, a scallop, which is a scalloped shell, a fleur-de-lis, which we all know is a French-styled lily that is mostly on French coats of arms, the heraldic rose, which is a 5-pointed rose, the heraldic sun, and mullet, which is a 5-pointed star, which is pretty normal. Roundels are simply colored circles, but each of them has their own name. So a bezant is gold or a coin. Partout is a blue circle. Plate is a silver or white circle. Hurt is a osier or a bruise. A pellet or ogress is a black circle. Palm is a green or an apple. And fountain is not actually a color, but it is 6 alternating waves of blue and silver. We find less of these in Bell heraldry, with the exception of when a shield is depicted in a heraldry, and it's usually black. So, what you need to know about animal charges. We have Dame Volpin's heraldry here, and her charges are foxes. I'm pretty sure they're foxes, and they are rampant facing the center, which doesn't really have a way to describe it because they're not holding anything up, and they're not holding each other up. So far as animals go, dragons, lions, but many other creatures are featured on coats of arms. You will find all sorts of mammals, birds, fish, and even imaginary animals. It is particular to remember about the critters that there is specific terminology for their positions, and that specific terminology depends on what kind of animal they are. So, four-legged beasts. Sir Jacques, rampant dexter-facing bear, is on a field of sable here. And so you have rampant, which is front claws raised forward in attack. The right front and back legs are generally higher than the left. You have Pazamp, which is walking, one foreleg raised, used for all animals except animals of prey, such as deer or stags, who are described as tripit. You have Guardant, which is a secondary descriptor, as in Rampant Guardian, which signifies that the animal is facing outwards instead of in profile. And Sajant, which is sitting, which is less common than the other two. Birds, or other things that fly. This is Sir Spriggot's shield, and it's a little grainy because it's the only one I have, but his bird, or his sparrow, is displayed, which means the body is in the center of the field, and the wings and legs, if legs are present, are spread. You have Alteron, which specifically describes an eagle displayed without beak or legs. And then you have Rising, which is a bird taking flight, leaving the ground with wings spread behind. We have a lots of birds that don't really fit into any of these three bird-specific descriptors, such as every single thing that has a falcon on it doesn't necessarily fit into these three categories, which makes describing some of the Brotherhood and Elite Blood Falcons heraldry is very difficult, or impossible, traditionally. And then you have fish. The thing described in Sir Gradamere's shield is not actually a fish, it's a turtle, but it's swimming, and it was the closest I could get without going into historical heraldry. So you have Nyant, which is swimming horizontally facing Dexter, which is what this turtle is. And then you have Harant, which is swimming upwards, Urant, which is swimming downwards, or Endowed, or Embowed, which is swimming horizontally facing Dexter with back arched, which is probably the most typical type of fish you're going to find on a heraldry. Other animal information. So animal symbols often, or historically, describe different quantities. So lions, bravery; dogs, faithfulness, reliability; stags, wisdom and long life; eagles, power and nobility; hares, speed; badger, endurance or hanging on. That sounds very Hufflepuff indeed. You could also design your own animal charge, for instance, a cat or horse or other pet, or you could choose a fabulous beast, which is what Kaleda did. So, fabulous beasts. There are 4 of them. They are the dragon, the griffin, the cockatrice, and the manticore. They are non-existent. They are not real that we're aware of, but are very fantasy, but are often used in heraldry because they look cool. So the dragon is the earliest and most common fabulous beast. It is also often worn as a badge by Romans, Anglo-Saxon, and the Welsh. It's described as a brave and cunning defender of treasure. You have a griffin, which is a combination of a lion and an eagle, which symbolizes both watchfulness and courage, and also guards treasure. And then you have the cockatrice, which is a cross between a cockerel and a dragon. Supposedly hatched from a cock's egg by a snake or toad. Could kill you by looking at you, and symbolizes protection. And then the manticore, a fearsome man-eating creature with a lion's body, a man's face, tusks, horns, and a deafening trumpet-like voice. Which I think is probably the one I haven't seen on any of our heraldry, because dragons, griffins, and cockatrice definitely exist.
I was talking to Hixa about that the other day as we were watching Blood of Zeus, that we were both amazed that there was not an evil knight somewhere that had taken a manticore as their heraldry.
Yeah, I haven't found any, like, in Bell, in the heraldry that I have access to. But there are definitely instances of the other 3 dragons more specifically, and then I mean Sir Diomedes has a cockatrice, you have a griffin, and there are a handful of others. I also know that the dragon, the griffin, and the cockatrice exist as heraldry for kingdoms in the SCA, but I don't know that the manticore does. I would have to look. Why aren't you moving? There we go. So relating charges to fields and other charges. Here we have Sir Keiichi's shield, which, even though is surprisingly plain looking compared to others, was still kind of hard to describe because there's no describing word for an 8-pointed star in heraldry. Chaos stars don't exist in heraldry. So there are 7 positions on the field that we use to describe charges that appear elsewhere but the center. So in base, which is at the bottom point, which would be down here. In pale, which is a vertical line, which is what these chaos stars are in, or these stripes of gold are in. In chief, which is a line across the top, which would be right here. In fess, which is a horizontal line through the center, which would be right here. In bend, which is diagonal from dexter chief to sinister base. And then in bend sinister, which is a diagonal in the opposite direction, or in orly, which is all around the border of the field. Relating charges to fields and other charges, part 2. Countercharged or countercolored is used to describe a situation in which a field is comprised of 2 colors and the charges are colored oppositely. Surmounted versus charged. If one charge is surmounted by another, the second charge is placed over the first, as in covering, not over, as in near to the chief, which is super confusing and takes a while to understand. But basically, if something is laying over top of something else, it's surmounted. If the second is placed over more than one charge, it can also be said to be over all. A charge that is surmounted by an ordinary may be called debruised. Supporting or sustaining is used to describe an animal holding another charge, such as a lion rampant supporting a sword. And or possibly another animal. Unclear. Couldn't figure that one out. Issuant is arising from the bottom of the field or the top of the fess. So essentially, if something is like rising out of the bottom of your shield, like Sir Galen's Avalonian heraldry has the Avalonian falcon kind of coming out of the bottom of the shield, that would be issuant and rising from the bottom of the field. Are there more terms? Yes, there are so many more terms. I have spent inordinate amounts of time on heraldsnet.org. The glossary on that website is extensive and very detailed. Half of it's in French, and that's just because the way we describe heraldry traditionally started in France. And so lots of the terms are in French, but they're defined in English. Contrary to popular belief, I don't know everything, and I reference this website a lot. I spent about 3 hours on it yesterday finding the most common terms, which were included in this. There are so many more terms. There are probably hundreds more terms because there are terms for just about every letter of the alphabet. So, where you find heraldry in Belegarth, you're going to find it in realm heraldry. You're going to find it in unit heraldry, as defined here by the House Dregoth flag. You are going to find it in peerage heraldry. And a lot of the times you are going to see heraldry depicted on, as I said earlier, shields, belt flags, garb, and banners. We are slowly but surely seeing more banners with heraldry depicted flying around events, which makes the event site look really cool. So we should do more of that. My heraldry project. As some of you may be aware, I have been working on collecting all of the heraldry within Belegarth and posting them on the heraldry overview and gallery page of the Belegarth wiki. It is incredibly time consuming because lots of people do not have digital versions of their heraldry. Here we see the realm of Rhun, the realm of Saracor, and the realm of Beornve, all of whose heraldries, with the exception of the bear in the Beornve heraldry, are pretty easy to describe. There is no four-legged beast term for standing. We have sitting, we have walking, and we have rampant. That I could find. Standing still is not something a four-legged beast usually does on heraldry, nor is holding a shield and a sword, so that was fun to figure out. So, present on this page are 5 heraldries I quite enjoy, one of which is my own, hopefully eventually, and you have Sir Argent, which breaks so many rules, and my own, which breaks at least 1 or 2 rules, because brown is not usually a color you find in heraldry. Neither is copper, which is what the moose is supposed to be. I know it looks orange. And then you have Sir Zypher's heraldry, which is actually quite easy and about the only thing I've found which charge is improper, because an acorn is brown, and this acorn is brown. And then you have Master Sir Thurat's heraldry. I'm fairly certain this is a seal. I am unsure. And this is a stylized version of a fleur-de-lis, which was also really cool to try to figure out. This is Sir Oroku's, and it breaks so many, many rules that it is really impossible for me to define it, because it's in Czech, but those checks have little things in them. They're not supposed to. There's no way to define a Czech field that has images in the Czech. So that's fun. And then we have some heraldry for one of the War Masters. This is War Master Cord. And this is a Caudine heraldry, which is Caudine Tonberry. And to be completely honest, the monster's heraldry breaks every existent heraldry defining rule. I didn't even try. Because there are so many things over things and under things, it was impossible. We have Sir Juggernauts, which is actually quite traditional in a sense. He is a bear passant on a field of sable. Chief at the top, with a tower, which I couldn't find the word to describe, though I know one exists, and a hammer. We have Sir V-Hills, which again, it's traditional in 3 of its sections, but then when you get to Chompy and its field that looks like it has teeth, it stops being properly describable there. And then you have Sir Caleda's, which is actually quite traditional in its method, and is very easily describable, as it is a field of gulls. I can't remember the right word for the diagonal line, of gold, and then a griffin rampant facing Dexter or Sinister, I can't remember, facing the direction it's facing. Okay, now that I've rambled on about heraldry for a bit, do we have any questions?
Can I tell my favorite heraldry story?
Sure.
So, at the Battle of Agincourt, the Duke of Brabant was late to the battle, and as such, grabbed the tabard off of a musician and went on the field. He ended up surviving the initial battle, and he was taken prisoner. As we all know, the king decided that there was a possibility that all of the entrenched nobles were going to attack him, so he ordered them all put to the sword. The Duke of Brabant, although he could have been held for a high ransom, ended up being murdered because he did not have his heraldry on and they could not identify him. This is why heraldry is important. I have invented a term that I like doing, which is called being Brabanted. You don't want to be Brabanted. That is also why you should have your heraldry on both the front and the back of any arming garment that you wear, so that people will also know you from the back.
So I spent a lot of time going through the heraldry that was displayed last night, doing all of it blazon, which is the term for like how you describe it. But I got to a point last night where I'm like, most of these break rules. Like, most of the blazons I did are not proper, with very few exceptions, like Kaleda's and Kalarn's and the Dregoth symbol and Sir Kyrian's. Most of the rest of our heraldry is unproperly blazonable. You can do it, it just doesn't follow the rules at all. And then there's just some that are impossible. Like most of the monster heraldry is unblazonable because it breaks too many rules. But I think that the fact that we have such a diverse heraldry in our community is really cool. We're a fantasy-esque community, therefore our heraldry doesn't really need to be blazonable if we don't want it to be. And so I find that it is quite nice. Part of the reason I started doing the heraldry project was because I kept getting squires asking me questions going, Antoinette, does somebody have such and such on a shield? I can in fact remember at least 4 discussions Cleda and I had while he was trying to make his heraldry going, Antoinette, is this on a thing? And me going, I don't know, let me go look. And not coming to an actual conclusion because I didn't have everyone's heraldry. I still don't have everyone's heraldry, but I have way more of it than I used to. And so with only so many colors and color combinations that can exist in the world and our ridiculous love of red and black as a community, it's really important that peers put their heraldry on an easily searchable thing. The wiki is a great place for that. So that squires or apprentices can go, all right, I want to do this. Does this already exist? And going and looking for it. There's also a strange tradition, and I don't know where it came from, and I don't actually know if it's historic or not, where a squire takes a color out of their knight's heraldry and puts it in their own. I don't know the historical accuracy of that. I have never been able to find the historical accuracy of that, but it is often something that happens in Bell. Will I be taking any colors out of Dop's heraldry? No. There's only so much a human can do with bright brick red and almost neon orange. So I don't know where that came from, like in the community, or where it may have stemmed from historically, because I cannot find any proof of it, but it is definitely something that does happen a lot. I know Argent took the black out of Damien's heraldry, and I'm pretty sure Static also is going to take the black because there's only so much a human can do with purple. And I know that Damien took the black out of Killian's, and Vale took the black out of Fox's white and black. And I do believe Guts took the red out of Piper's red and gray. So, and then like, that's another thing. Guts has a check pattern, but it's a honeycomb check pattern, and I can't find a description for that. So it's still a field pattern, but a non-describable one. So like, that happens a lot in our sport. If you want your heraldry to be blazonable, I suggest taking it to the SCA and finding a herald who specializes in blazon and letting them look at it, and they will tell you whether or not it is blazonable, if that is something that matters to you. does not matter to a lot of people. But if it does, that's a great way to find out if something is blazing.
Your comment about following things in heraldry and Belegarth. I know for myself, the reason that my knight heraldry has check in it was because I was the first knight by title in my realm, and as such, I wanted to pay homage to the history of check in Belegarth's heraldry. So that is why I did that.
Yeah, there are lots of little things like that, but I don't know specifically where the taking colors from your knight's heraldry tradition came from. Because I can't find anything historical about it.
Squire Carps, I see that you are wearing your knight's heraldry on your tabard. As a note, you have Sir Angmarth to thank for that. He was the first person that we know of to do that.
To wear the heraldry.
Yeah.
Test, can you hear me?
Yeah.
What's going on with this? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, sorry. I have
okay.
trouble with this sometimes. So you said the first person to wear their heraldry on the front of their tabard was Sir Angmar?
Yeah.
Angmarth, yes.
Wonderful.
And
Angmar.
then the first person to put on a white tabard was Sir Martin. So,
Sir Martin.
Yep.
About when was that? Is that like is there a year that you can reference?
I have not been able to reference a year. All I know is that I found across it on an old forum post, and then I put it up so I would remember it. But
I don't
as
even
an addition,
remember when either of those two gentlemen got knighted. It was way before my time.
as an addition to what you guys were talking about previously about taking like your knight's colors, from discussions that I've had with like my peerage siblings, we all intend to do that. Granted, we're knighted in the future.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure where that came from because I can't find any historical reference for it. Because historically knights were made by kings, and they just kind of picked what they wanted, so long as somebody else didn't have it. And I can't find where that practice started within foam fighting, but it's definitely a thing that happens a lot. I just have no idea where it comes from.
Interesting. I have a question. If it's still question time,
it is still.
I was wondering if there was any additional meaning or significance behind the check that maybe I missed out at the beginning that you could talk about, or in general. I just, in the designs that I have drafted for my own personal heraldry for the future, I've included checkers, but I don't want to use it without knowing if there's any extra history behind it.
It just
you know what I mean?
exists a lot. I think it was an easy pattern to use, and so when you look back at like some of the now retired, much older knights of Numenor and knights of Middle-earth, most of their shields are just halved down the center with a solid color on one side and a check section on the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it has any historical significance. I think it was just easy to paint.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, I think it looks really cool. Yeah.
I often consider for my squires the ability to sew check as a very important thing. In quilting, it's like 9-patch. I consider it to be the chainmail of the garb world.
It's not fun to do.
It's
but learning how to do it and like getting like I've sewn half of one of my old shields. I did, but that's a really cool process. And as far as like just a skill to have, it's a pretty good one.
I literally had to get my aunt, who is a quilter, to sit down and help me figure it out because I couldn't figure it out. It's
exciting.
It's not an easy thing to do, but it also does look really cool when you're done. I feel for Lady Armstrong, who has probably sewn more Numenorian check in her life than any human should ever have to sew.
The other issue with check is that you can't get it printed because printing black is very difficult. But you could theoretically, if you didn't have black in your check, go to like whatever it is where you can get fabric printed and just have rolls of it printed. And the final thing that I will say as far as check goes is if you are sewing it, cut each piece individually.
Yeah.
Don't fall into the trap of like, I'm going to stack like 4 layers up and do all my strips that way. They will always shrink. It will never work. You have to cut each strip individually, measure each strip and cut it as an individual, and then your check will work better. But if you try to like take any sort of shortcut, it doesn't work.
You can also occasionally, if your color combination isn't totally weird, find checked quilting fabric that you can just use. I know that I occasionally managed to find a green and black check that Kyrian then proceeds to like steal from me, or make me sew into stuff for him, because his color combination of green and black doesn't usually exist in a checked fabric. And checked is not a tartan. So if you're going looking for checked fabric and you are end up at it and they proceed to point you to tartan, tartan is different than checked and is also probably going to be like 4 times more expensive, because tartan is expensive because it's hard to print and weave. Which is why you see very, very few, if I don't think any, tartan pattern in our heraldry and bell, or most heraldry, with the exception of like Highlands of Scotland. So because it's hard to print and it's expensive to weave. But yeah, so sometimes you can get lucky and find pre-printed checked fabric, depending on if your color combination's not totally out there. Like, Sir Ugar is never going to find a neon blue and orange check fabric. He will have to make it if he wants checks, or have someone make it for him. And it's the same with like Sir Eton or Dragoon Eton. Purple and orange are not a color combination you're going to find in pre-made check fabric. So that's something to consider sometimes if you don't want to sew your own check, what colors you're using, and are they easily findable in pre-made checked fabric.
Wonderful. Thank you for all the info. I have another question.
Sure.
If you can answer. We still have time, right?
We have tons of time because I talk too fast.
So I was curious about the existence of text in heraldry. Are there any examples in Belagarth or similar adjacent organizations that have that as an example, or is that like against the rules?
I mean, there are really no rules for heraldry in Bell. There are only rules if you want to be able to properly blazon your heraldry, which is the method of describing it in heraldry terms that started existing in France when they started doing this. But like full-on words on heraldry, or like just letters?
I mean, I was thinking words, like a quote or like, yeah, something like that.
I don't think so. I mean, Sir Treethump's heraldry is a stylized letter T in the center of his shield. But I don't think anyone has full-on words on their heraldry. Not to say it's not doable, but most of the time when you look at heraldry, you're going to see like text on the bottom on like ribbons, traditionally. But if you want to put text on your heraldry, no one's going to stop you. The only thing I tell people to think about when they're creating heraldry is to remember how difficult it's going to be to recreate on everything you want to put it on.
Gotcha. Will you go more into, you said ribbons, text on ribbons?
Yeah, so...
Is that something that is in, go ahead.
So traditionally, if you wanted text in or around, or like names or locations, or like your duchy title or whatever, it would be in like a little ribbon on the bottom. Like when you look at the heraldry for King Henry VIII and his many wives, and the like Tudor or like the honor and what have you, quote, like, what's the right word, like what the heraldry is going to stand for. So, like, when you have, like, a Tudor rose and a pomegranate for King Henry and Queen Catherine, on the bottom of it, it would have, like, the Latin words for honor and fertility, and that would be on a little ribbon kind of scroll work on the, like, underneath the heraldry itself.
Gotcha.
Not
Yeah,
as
I've seen
part
that.
of it.
I have a term for that.
Sure.
The actual shield shape of the heraldry portion is the device, and the other filigree and extra stuff outside and next to that is the augmentation.
Augmentation.
So
I have an example I'd like to show. Maybe that as like a confirmation. As I have a positive shield that I had made when I was like a first year person. I never really put thought into it. I just thought it was neat.
like I said, there are so many heraldry terms, and you cannot remember them all.
Yeah. You guys want to see mine? After the cards?
Oh, so yeah,
Like this is an example of that.
yeah, there's nothing saying you can't do that. I mean, is that a Magikarp?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
of course. Thank you.
I love it. I spent so much time looking for a heraldry with a fish on it yesterday, or something swimming. Sven, you wanted to show something?
Yes.
Yeah. Those does disabled screen sharing.
Oh, sorry, fixing. Fixed. You should be able to screen share now.
Neat. That's totally blazonable.
Yes, that's completely blazonable. It's fairly straightforward. And that's what makes things blazonable. The minute you get, like, super weird about stuff, you end up not blazonable.
Right. Thought
Gotcha.
you'd like to see that.
That's very neat. I
That's
like it.
yours,
I have.
Then?
What?
That's yours?
Yeah.
I like it.
It's very neat. I also have. I do have a lot of questions because this is
That's
actually
okay.
a topic that I've been thinking a lot about and talking with my knight about. Like, and I've talked to other knights who have less traditional things like references to video games or anime and stuff included in theirs. And I'm trying to find this like balance. Excuse me. This balance between. I guess, an expression of myself who lives in a modern world and keeping it close to like medieval, tradition. And I'm worried about breaking like the rules, but the rules seem pretty restrictive on adding creativity to it.
So the rules for heraldry only exist if you want your heraldry to be blazonable, which means described through the traditional means of describing heraldry. If you don't care, then it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. I mean, I'm someone who cares a lot about the history of things, and the heraldry I have for myself is a copper moose on a brown background with 4 lines of alternating green and cream, which is not blazonable at all. And with the exception of the moose is walking, so one of his legs is raised. Brown is not a color you usually use in heraldry. Neither is copper, neither is cream.
Gotcha.
So it really only matters if you want it to be historically accurate. If you don't care about the historical accuracy, then you can do whatever you want.
Gotcha. Oroku, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I have seen your heraldry displayed differently. Like this doesn't match the same one as in the photo. Is there a reason why you have so many?
There is, actually. So this is actually a really good point. So the heraldry that you saw on the shield is my Knight's Heraldry. That is my officially registered, if you will, Knight's Heraldry of Bellegarth. The problem was I attended a heraldry class by Sir Kyrian and discovered that that's completely unblazonable. And I wanted something that was blazonable. So as he worked through his slides, I literally sketched out an idea during that class and came up with this. So this is a much more, let me move my chain here. That is a much more historical style of heraldry. I have spoken to several. Per chevron, sable, and azure.
Only if you care about the historical accuracy, which Oroku does. And
but the important thing
other
about
people do. But the important part about your heraldry is that you like it and it defines you.
Gotcha.
The other important thing about blazoning and the rules of heraldry is one of the unknown things, and this is something that Sir Kyrian touched on in his talk, is for a large part of it, the rules are completely invented. And what you blazon, your blazon doesn't have to match at all what you see. As long as you can kind of invent it and say, these within the rules, this is what this is, then it's totally legitimate. My good friend Sir Ugadai has a lion with a rather large member, and that is a very interesting blazon. But it's also very historical. But the fact of the matter is that you can bend and break the rules as far as it goes. And if you want to be creative, just be creative in how you want to blazon it. Because if it says a fish, it doesn't. A fish is huge. That's a really wide berth. So your heraldry is an orca. Well, it's a fish now. The other thing
I gotcha.
We ended up discussing last night in between Bardic competition people when I was like asking Oroku, is there something with a fish on it in Bell that I'm just not seeing? And there's really not. There's a swimming turtle, which is what I used in the presentation, but it turned into a discussion on could an orca be rampant? Because technically an orca is a mammal and not a fish, and therefore doesn't necessarily quantify as a fish when you're looking at the heraldry things, but it also doesn't have legs, so therefore it cannot be a four-legged beast. But could it be rampant was a discussion we ended up having last night. So like,
but in the medieval mind, anything that swam in the ocean was a fish.
Right.
If you know about the Queen of England, she owns all the whales and porpoises that surround the British Isles because she owns all the fish. And that was a fish. So
historically speaking, yes.
One of the things to remember on blazons also is a huge portion of blazon itself was so that I could forward what I would be wearing to wherever I was going. So I would send a message to Antoinette's castle, and my herald would stop in and say, Sir Oroku will be arriving. Look for him. He is per chevron sable and azure chevron argent between 3 lotus flowers and fox proper rampart. The herald there could draw something up similar, and then they would know who I was when I arrived. It was a very early form of this is what he looks like. They would describe my device, and they would be like, oh, that must be Sir Oroku.
And his retinue of humans that would be coming with him. Because
yes. Oh, by the way, he's also a fox. Oh, well, that's easy enough.
So it doesn't really affect us on the fighting field a lot, because if you're looking for someone, your brain's gonna go, what does their garb look like, not what does their device look like. So when you're looking for me at an event, you're looking for something that's likely got a moose on it, which is what my heraldry does. I have Kaleda to blame for that. And that night of... Anyway, so now everything I own has moose on it. So if you're looking at something and you see a moose with one of its front legs raised, that's probably me. I mean, it's on the garb I'm wearing right now. And on 3 other things, including my bed sheets. So when you look in Bell, you're not necessarily looking at people's heraldry unless you're looking specifically at their heraldry cards.
So in my mind, it jumped to an example that's helping me understand this. I saw recently where somebody took a or artists took a character from a cartoon or whatever, and then several artists drew it in their own individual art style, where it was the same character, but this is a different interpretation of the character based on them. So this example of the proper heraldry can exist, and so long as within the parameters of that heraldry, it reflects your heraldry, but it can exist in different communities and still be the same character or heraldry at that point.
Essentially,
Is that a
yeah.
safe way? Cool. I think I get the concept now. It's very interesting. Thank you guys for helping me explain or understand.
No problem.
I posted in the chat a cool link to a site that's a heraldry device editor. So you can play with the different divisions and fields and ordinaries and tinctures. And there's a bunch of charges in the library that you can play with.
Thank you. I'm saving that link right now.
This site does not strictly adhere to the rules of tincture, which Antoinette did not talk about, but
Nope.
doesn't necessarily apply to Belegarth.
Didn't
so
do
that's
that
fine.
for a reason.
Yeah, we don't really follow that rule, but historically it's a thing.
Historically, you're told not to put metal on metal and color on color, but we do it anyways because we don't.
Yeah.
Which is why I didn't touch on that.
I have taken Sir Kyrian's heraldry class, and he touched on that a bit.
Yeah.
But Kyrian has far more knowledge about this than I do. I just find it incredibly interesting that we have such a diverse heraldry in the community, and like so many things are very similar. My fluffy beast has decided to make an appearance. But can also be so very different, but so very definable. Like if you see any sort of stylized version of a white and green four-headed dragon thing, you know you're looking at something that's probably part of Clan of the Hydra, even if it's not like the stylized specific Hydra image that is like their unit symbol. Also, if you see a sword with a book near it, it's probably Sons of Silas, depending on how they've done it. If you see a moose, it's probably me. If you see a fox, it's probably a Roku. And so it's just an interesting way that we've taken colors, images, animals, symbols to like denote things in Bell that make them very easily definable. And like, that's the point of heraldry. Like, you know, if you see a belt flag running around with a lotus on it, the only two options are that person's from Stygia or Stygia and or they're part of Sir Peter the Quick's unit, whose name Amir. Or they're Amir, because those are the only two places you see a lotus in Belegarth. And depending on what that lotus looks like, if it's a really proper looking lotus and it's white on a blue background, you're probably looking at Amir. But if it's a fairly stylized lotus on a rainbow, you're probably looking at someone who's from Oroku's realm. And so like that way we've taken images and colors and symbols and made them connected to people and places and groups is basically what heraldry is. It's like if you see the Gelf symbol, you know that person is a Gelf without having to like stop and think about it because it's the Gelf symbol. Or like if you see that, there we go, you know what it is and what everyone wearing it is a part of, right? Like the symbols, and that's essentially what heraldry is us when you break it down as a symbol, and how we've taken those things and made them mean something that they necessarily don't outside of Belegarth, right? Like Sven's Master's hood for the Artificers Guild, or my that we know is the Master's torch thing for the Seneschal's Guild. We don't have a Master Chronicler yet, so we haven't seen that yet. But like, we've taken those things and we've made them mean something they don't necessarily mean outside of Belegarth. But when we look at them outside of Bel, your brain usually immediately goes to what it means inside of Belegarth. So like, I don't ever think of like things as lots of things as what they are anymore. Like, most people would look at your Magikarp shield and go, that's a fish. And we all went, that's a Pokemon. Because that's what our brain connects that image to. Even though, yeah, it's a fish, but it's a very specific fish. And it brings back a very specific thought. And that's sort of what heraldry is supposed to do. We have 3 minutes. Are there any more questions?
I'm
All
good.
right.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It
And
was.
looks
I
like-
learned a lot.
Awesome. And it looks like Bokdar is here. So, Sven, can you throw up the... Thank you.